Welcome everybody to the October 2021 meeting of the Historic Highway 99 Association. At this meeting, we have a special guest, well, a couple of special guests. We have Ellen Pollock and Diana. Unfortunately, I don't remember your last name, but give me just a second here. And but they are from the St. Francis Dam the St. Francis Dam Disaster
National Memorial Foundation.
Thank you. I knew I'd get that. Thank you. And they are here to give us a wonderful presentation on, well, to be honest, probably the largest impact. I'm not sure how to put it. It impacted Highway 99, but it is also probably the largest impact in California history in so many ways. I mean, we have registered geologists and engineers because of that event. It is impacted so much. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our guests, and I will see what I can do about trying to transfer things.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to give you guys a little introduction about the two of us. Alan was the one who visited the Johnstown flood area, and he noticed so many things in common with our dam. And he thought, you know, here they have this great national memorial, and they have, you know, a lot of things, and we've got nothing. And so he thought, we need a national memorial. So he didn't know how to do it. He went about trying to find someone to help him out. And we had a mutual friend. My background is doing wilderness and land legislations. And so his friend, my friend, put us together. And I thought about it for a little while because I had 7 legislations in that I had to work on. And I finally decided to go ahead and do it, actually for my mother, because they walked on the dam when my mother was 6 years old, and my grandparents and her 2 siblings walked on the dam 2 days before it broke, and it impacted their lives for the rest of their life. So I decided to jump in and work on the legislation, and Alan and I worked on it together. We made multiple trips to DC to lobby for it. And it took us 7.5 years to get it passed. But and that was with absolutely, you know, nobody not wanting to do it. So I'm pretty pleased we have it now. We're now working on the what's going to be the visitor center. And so tonight, Alan's going to give you the history, and then I will jump in and I will talk about the people that survived and the people that died. So Alan,
okay,
you're on.
First let me see if I can share our screen here so we can. So it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So we need you to let us do it.
Give me a moment here. I apologize here. Let's see. Hold on a second here. Okay, just changed you to the host.
I'm host. Okay. All right. Let's see. Gotta go here. Can you see that?
It says started screen sharing. Yes.
All right. Sharing screen. You should be seeing a slide now that says St. Francis Dam disaster, March 12th, 13th, 1928. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to see if I can put this full screen.
Start the slideshow.
Yeah, start slideshow.
Review.
Beginning. Okay, do you still see
There you
that?
go. You're good.
Okay, perfect. All right. Just to reiterate what Diane was saying about how we started this. First of all, you may or may not know that the St. Francis Dam site now is both a national memorial and a national monument. It was nothing for 90 years. Basically, a pack of ruins and a plaque. The only memorialization at the site was a plaque a mile and a half away next to the DWP Powerhouse #2, and that's the only thing that has been there for 90 years. And it hasn't been there for 90 years, probably been there for 20 years or whatever. So when I visited Johnstown National Memorial in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, that was the site of a dam that burst in 1889, killing over 2,000 people in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. That's the worst dam disaster in American history. And we are probably the second worst here at the St. Francis Dam site. And so we decided that we should be a national memorial too, just like Johnstown is. And we were able to achieve that. And that's where we're at today, working on getting a visitor center there. But we're going to tell you the story of the St. Francis Dam disaster. And that's what this presentation will be about. We'll be happy to take any questions after we're finished. So let's get started. Now, the story of the St. Francis Dam flood is a tragic chapter in the story of the water history of Los Angeles and Southern California. And interestingly, it's also what I call a Shakespearean rise and fall story of probably the most important historical figure in Los Angeles history, that being William Mulholland. But I'm going to take you way back to the beginning of Los Angeles history in 1781. And this, on September 4th, 1781, a group of 44 settlers founded the Pueblo of Los Angeles. And in the early days of the Pueblo, the city water supply was obtained solely from the Los Angeles River. And water was brought to the Pueblo by way of a series of ditches, or what they called zanjas in Spanish. And I probably mispronounced that, and I apologize. By 1868, the population of the Pueblo had grown to around 5,000 people. And in that year, the city of Los Angeles entered into a 30-year lease contract with the private Los Angeles City Water Company to provide water to the city. In 1875, Fred Eaton, who was the son of the founder of Pasadena, Benjamin Eaton, became superintendent of the Los Angeles City Water Company. He was 19 years old at the time. He was also a future mayor of Los Angeles, and would later play a prominent role in bringing more water to this growing city. In 1877, an Irish immigrant, William Mulholland, arrived in Los Angeles. And the next year, he was hired to work for the Los Angeles City Water Company as a zanjero, or ditch tender. Mulholland had little formal schooling, but nonetheless was a brilliant man who read voraciously, and he taught himself the sciences like engineering and geology. Mulholland struck up a close friendship with Eaton, and he worked his way up through the ranks of the water company. And by 1886, he became superintendent of the Los Angeles City Water Company. And he was an old man at the time of 31. Now, the population of Los Angeles boomed in the 1880s, mostly due to the coming of the Southern Pacific and Santa Fe railroads, and a tourist explosion inspired by Helen Hunt Jackson's enormously popular book, Ramona. So by the turn of the 20th century, Los Angeles had mushroomed into a population of around 100,000 people, and it became obvious to those providing the LA water supply that the Los Angeles River would not be able to supply an adequate amount of water if the city were to grow even larger. So Fred Eaton took an excursion out to the Owens Valley in the summer of 1892. And he was aware, even at that time, of the impending water crisis in Los Angeles. And when he saw the Owens River for the first time, he began to visualize a possible solution to LA's water problems. After torturous negotiations starting in 1898, when the lease for the Los Angeles City Water Company ran out, the city of Los Angeles formally took ownership of the first Los Angeles Municipal Waterworks system in 1902. And Mulholland was to continue as the superintendent of the new city-owned water company, which they renamed the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply in 1911. But back in 1904, Eaton took Mulholland on a buckboard trip to the Owens Valley. And Eaton wanted to convince Mulholland that the Owens River might in some way be diverted to Los Angeles to become the extra water source this growing city desperately needed. And it was on this trip that Mulholland and Eaton hatched the idea of building an aqueduct from the Owens Valley to the San Fernando Valley. But this proposed project could not occur without the water rights to the Owens River. The National Reclamation Act of June 17, 1902 had created the U.S. Reclamation Service, whose primary goal was to create irrigation for the arid regions of the Western U.S. Joseph Barlow Lippincott, who would play a prominent role in helping Los Angeles obtain water rights to the Owens River, was appointed supervising engineer for California for the Reclamation Service. Lippincott was asked by his boss, Frederick Newell, who was the head of the service, to study the feasibility of an irrigation project for the Owens Valley. Late in 1904, Lippincott learned that his friends Eaton and Mulholland were looking at the Owens River as the water source for Los Angeles. Eventually, Lippincott became convinced that the greater good would be served by helping Los Angeles in its quest for the water rights to the Owens River. But this action would likely kill the prospect of a reclamation project for the valley. And while still under the employ of the Reclamation Service, Lippincott helped the city of Los Angeles in its clandestine purchase of land along the river in the Owens Valley. In March 1905, Eaton traveled to the Owens Valley to buy up land options and water rights from Owens Valley ranchers and farmers. And due to his association with Lippincott, the Owens Valley people assumed that Eaton was buying up the land for the Reclamation Service. And although acting as an agent for Los Angeles to obtain the water rights needed to build the aqueduct, Eaton never confirmed nor denied this assumption. And this would anger Owens Valley residents for decades to come. And honestly, they're still angry about what Eaton did. That same month, Mulholland reported to the Board of Water Commissioners that he had surveyed all the available water sources in Southern California and recommended the Owens River as the only viable source of additional water. Immediately following Mulholland's presentation, Eaton proposed that the city acquire from him whatever water rights and options he had been able to secure to further the project. Then on July 29th, 1905, Mulholland returned from a car trip to the Owens Valley proclaiming, "The last spike is driven. The options are secure." And you see here a headline in the Los Angeles Times stating, "Titanic project to give city a river." Later that year, Los Angeles voters approved a $1.5 million bond issue by more than a 10-to-1 margin for the purchase of Owens Valley land and water rights. And in 1907, Los Angeles voters again gave their overwhelming consent to the project, approving a $23 million bond issue for construction of the aqueduct. Between 1908 and 1913, Mulholland directed construction of the 233-mile-long Los Angeles Aqueduct from the Owens Valley to the San Fernando Valley. The project was completed on time and within budget, and Mulholland becomes this absolute hero to the city of Los Angeles. In fact, on November 5th, 1913, 40,000 Angelenos arrived by car, wagon, and buggy to celebrate the opening of the Los Angeles Aqueduct at the Cascades in present-day Sylmar. And as you pass on what was Highway 99 and is now Interstate 5, you still see the remnants of this as you pass through Sylmar heading towards Newhall. So Mulholland becomes this great hero to Los Angeles, but that was not how the people of the Owens Valley viewed it. In 1921, California encountered drought conditions, with both Los Angeles and the Owens Valley facing water shortages by the spring of 1923. And to increase its water supply, the city began pumping groundwater, to the dismay of farmers in the Independence area in the Owens Valley. Mulholland then chose to buy out the Independence farmers, and he began purchasing properties to the north of Independence, and he was causing alarm to the residents of Bishop and Big Pine. What became known as the Owens Valley or California Water Wars began in 1924. Wilford and Mark Watterson, owners of the Inyo County Bank, had organized Valley residents into a unified opposition force through the formation of an irrigation district in 1922. In response, Los Angeles gained control of a major canal near Bishop, and local farmers began illegally diverting water from the canal, and Los Angeles countered by randomly purchasing land and water in the Bishop area. In August 1923, Los Angeles purchased the Big Pine Canal and later filed a lawsuit against local farmers to prevent them from illegally diverting the water. Now, this was the last straw for the locals. So, violence began and erupted in May 1924 when 40 men dynamited the Lone Pine Aqueduct spillway gate. Then in November 1924, Mark Watterson led around 60 to 100 people to occupy the Alabama gates, which you can see pictured in the upper left photo here on the right side of the screen of the picture. They closed the aqueduct by opening the emergency spillway, and they caused water to flow out of the aqueduct into the surrounding area. Attacks on the aqueduct began again in April 1926, and by July 1927, there had been 10 instances of dynamiting of the aqueduct. But just as the controversy was reaching its zenith, the resistance of the Owens Valley was suddenly undermined when the Wattersons closed the doors of all branches of the Inyo County Bank. Not only were the Wattersons bankrupt, but they were also tried and convicted of 36 counts of embezzlement, and thus ended the water wars. Between 1924 and 1926, amid concerns about the water wars, as well as the possibility of earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault cutting off the aqueduct, Mulholland built a series of reservoirs around Los Angeles to provide a reserve of water for the city. The last of these reservoirs was the St. Francis Dam. Construction of the St. Francis Dam began in August 1924 in San Francisco Canyon. It was originally planned to be 185 feet high, but the dam was twice raised by 10 feet to a total of 205 feet without increasing the diameter of the base of the dam. And this turned out to be a major error in dam construction. The idea had been to increase the capacity of the reservoir beyond what they originally had thought about. The dam was unwittingly built against an ancient Paleolithic landslide composed of Polona schist on its eastern abutment. In this photo, you can see the eastern abutment on the right side of the photo. On the western abutment and on the left side of the photo was a rock called Sespe conglomerate, which tended to dissolve when saturated in water. There were a number of errors made in the construction of the foundation of the dam, except, ironically, in its center section. They failed to install drainage wells along the entire base of the dam, putting the dam at risk for a phenomenon called hydraulic uplift, in which the dam could tilt upward from the pressure of the water behind it. Also, the mix of the concrete was of questionable quality and workmanship. They used local rock in the concrete mix, and they failed to adequately wash the rock prior to mixing the concrete. Construction of the St. Francis Dam was completed in 1926, and water began to fill the reservoir on March 1st, 1926. And it took 2 years to fill up the reservoir, until on March 7th, 1928, the water reached its highest level within 3 inches below the crest of the spillway. Just 5 days later, tragedy struck the St. Francis Dam and began William Mulholland's worst nightmare. We take you now to March 12th, 1928. It's 10:30 a.m. and dam keeper Tony Harnischfeger discovers a new leak in the dam's western abutment. He was especially concerned with the muddy content of the runoff he observed, which could indicate to him that the water was eroding the dam's foundation. And he immediately alerted Mulholland. And Mulholland and his assistant, Harvey Van Norman, arrived and began inspecting the area of the leak. So Van Norman discovers the source of the leak, and by following the runoff, he determined that the muddy appearance of the water, which would be a concern, was coming not from the leak itself, but from a place where the water came into contact with loose soil from a newly cut access road. And you can see the arrow on the left side of the picture pointing to that access road. For the next 2 hours, Mulholland, Van Norman, and Harnischfeger inspected the dam in various leaks and seepages, and they found nothing out of the ordinary or of concern for a large dam, at least to them. Both Mulholland and Van Norman were convinced that the new leak posed no threat. So they returned to Los Angeles. And that was a decision Mulholland would come to regret for the rest of his life. Now that same evening, it's 11:50 p.m. and Ace Hopewell, a carpenter at Powerhouse Number 1, rides past the dam on his motorcycle. Approximately 1 mile upstream from the dam, and according to his testimony later, he heard above the sound of his motorcycle a noise he described as, quote, rocks rolling down the mountain, unquote. He stopped, dismounted from his motorcycle, leaving the engine idling, smoked a cigarette, and was checking the hillside above him. And he could still hear the sound that caught his attention earlier, although now it was fainter and behind him. He assumed it was a landslide since they were common to the area, and he was satisfied he was in no danger, and he continued on his way. When he arrived at Powerhouse Number 1, he found out that he was probably the last person who survived to see the St. Francis Dam intact. On March 12th, 1928, at 11:57 and 30 seconds p.m., the St. Francis Dam collapsed. According to research by Dr. J. David Rogers, who is chair of geological engineering at the University of Missouri in Rolla, Missouri, in papers he published in 1992 and 1995, the catastrophic event began with a landslide of the water-saturated eastern abutment and was exacerbated by a hydraulic uplift phenomenon of the inadequately constructed base of the dam, with eventual failure of the dam's western abutment as well. It turns out that that exact time of 11:57 and 30 seconds p.m. was based on the fact that personnel of the Bureau of Waterworks and Supply at both receiving stations in Los Angeles and at Powerhouse Number 1 noted a sharp drop in voltage on their lines at exactly that time. Simultaneously, a transformer at Southern California Edison Saugus substation on today's Magic Mountain Parkway exploded. This transformer was connected to Edison's Antelope Valley Burrell power line, running up the western hillside of the canyon near the dam to poles located about 90 feet above the eastern abutment. The prevailing theory is that this line was severed as the eastern hillside and abutment gave way. The grounded lines caused a short, which in turn caused the transformer to explode. Dam keeper Tony Harnischfeger and his family were the first casualties caught in the flood wave. Here he's pictured with his son Coder and his wife, but it was his girlfriend Leona Johnson who was with him at the time that the dam ruptured, and she was found wedged between 2 blocks of concrete near the base of the dam. This leads to the notion that she and the dam keeper might have been inspecting the dam immediately before its failure. Neither Tony Harnischfeger's body nor that of his 6-year-old son Coder would ever be recovered. 5 minutes after the collapse, having traveled 1.5 miles at an average speed of 18 miles per hour, the now 120-foot high flood wave destroyed the heavy concrete Powerhouse Number 2, leaving only its 2 turbines intact, and claimed the lives of 64 of the 67 workmen and their family members who lived nearby. On March 13th, between 12:05 a.m. and 1 a.m., San Francisco Canyon was also ravaged by the floodwaters. At the base of the canyon, in what is the present-day Tesoro del Valle housing development, the water destroyed part of actor Harry Carey's ranch, including a Navajo trading post, which had been a popular tourist attraction. 2 Navajo caretakers lost their lives at the ranch. Turns out Carey was away on business in New York at the time, so he survived. Legend has it a group of Navajo Native Americans hired by Carey to work at the trading post had called Carey the night before the dam break, asking to leave the ranch for Arizona based on a medicine man's premonition of an impending rupture. But according to Carey's son, Harry Carey Jr., the Navajos actually asked Carey about 1 month before this if they could leave, after the medicine man went deer hunting near the dam and noticed a big crack in the face of it. At 1 a.m., the deluge, now 55 feet high, continued generally following the westward course of the Santa Clara River. It hit and demolished Edison's Saugus substation, leaving the entire Santa Clara River Valley and parts of Ventura and Oxnard without power. Raymond Starbird was an assistant Edison patrolman at the Saugus substation, and he was nearly washed away by the flood. He survived, hitched a ride to Wood's garage next to the Saugus Cafe, pictured in the photo here. There, Starbird placed a call to Sheriff's Substation number 6 in Newhall, and is thus credited with being the first person to sound the alarm about the flood. If any of you are familiar with downtown Newhall, you might recognize this building as part of the Canyon Theater Guild theater group. At 1:25 a.m., 150 Edison linemen were fast asleep in their tents at Kemp, a temporary camp near a railroad siding just east of the Los Angeles-Ventura County line. Night watchman Ed Locke watched in horror as a huge flood of water approached the camp at 12 miles per hour. Locke ran through the camp, waking up as many people as possible. But the water hit a geological outcropping called Blue Cut and doubled back on the camp, creating a whirlpool that uprooted the tents. Most of the workers who survived had actually buttoned up their tents, allowing them to float on the whirlpool. But 84 of their fellow workers perished on this night, along with Locke, who was named a true hero of the flood. At 1:30 a.m., telephone operators such as Louise Geip in Santa Paula, pictured here, and Rysel Jones in Satakoy, who were subsequently named the Hello Girls, bravely stayed at their posts after being notified of the oncoming flood and began systematically calling residents in low-lying areas, urging them to flee to higher ground. Louise Geip notified California Highway Patrol Officer Thornton Edwards, who lived in Santa Paula, and then started calling the homes of those in danger. Edwards, who was an ex-B movie actor and became and after the flood became a movie actor again, was soon joined by another officer, Stanley Baker, and the two used their motorcycles to awaken and warn residents by leaving their sirens running and crisscrossing the streets in the danger zone. Edwards and Baker rode for more than 1 hour through the lower sections of Santa Paula. Taking different routes, the two raced through the town with their sirens screaming. And due to their efforts, many residents were saved as they rushed to the hills, only to watch their homes get crushed below them. For his wild yet courageous ride, Edwards is remembered as the Paul Revere of the St. Francis flood. He later was awarded this medal by the city of Santa Paula. In 2003, a statue was erected in Santa Paula in Edwards and Baker's honor. Around 2 a.m., the phone rang at the Mulholland residence. The chief's daughter answered and woke up her father with terrible news. And as he lurched for the phone, he repeated this mantra over and over: "Please, God, don't let people be killed." At 5:30 a.m., having devastated much of Santa Paula and heavily damaging the towns of Piru, Fillmore, and Bardale, the floodwaters emptied into the Pacific Ocean near Ventura at Montalvo, washing victims and debris out to sea. It had taken 5 hours and 27 minutes to travel 54 miles from the dam site to the ocean. And as it reached the coast, the flood was nearly 2 miles wide, traveling at 6 miles per hour. Immediately following the dam break, as many as 8 agencies from the city, county, state, and federal began investigating the cause of the disaster. Most significant was the 2-week coroner's inquest led by the ambitious Los Angeles District Attorney Asa Keys. Keys and the coroner's jury relentlessly questioned Mulholland about the composition of the concrete, the selection of the dam site on an earthquake fault, the construction and drainage of the dam's foundation, the anchoring of the dam to the walls of the canyon, and Mulholland's unquestioned role in supervising the dam construction. Keys accused Mulholland of ignoring repeated leaks in the dam days prior to the failure. Asked by Keys if he would build the dam on the same spot again, Mulholland replies, "No, I must be frank and say that now I would not." Keys pressed on, asking Mulholland, "Why not?" His reply, "It failed, that's why. There's a hoodoo on it. It is vulnerable against human aggression, and I would not build it there." So Mulholland still suspected that the dam had been dynamited by an Owens Valley conspiracy ring to avenge its construction. This was never proven to be the case. Toward the end of his testimony, Mulholland humbly stated, "Don't blame anybody else. You just fasten it on me. If there is an error of human judgment, I am the human." At the end of the inquest, the coroner's jury concluded, "The destruction of this dam was caused by the failure of the rock formations upon which it was built, and not by any error in the design of the dam itself or defect in the materials on which the dam was constructed." The jurors felt that the preponderance of evidence favored an initial failure on the dam's western abutment, which was anchored to a type of rock called red Sespe conglomerate. However, this theory was later proven incorrect by the research of J. David Rogers, which pointed to the Polona schist at the eastern abutment as the initial failure. During the inquest, Keys demonstrated how the Sespe conglomerate rock disintegrates when exposed to water. He did this by placing a piece of the rock in a glass of water and showed everybody the rock dissolving in the glass. So jurors placed the blame squarely on the shoulders of Mulholland and his Bureau of Waterworks and Supply. They further attacked the unquestioning trust in Mulholland's expertise. The final jury statement actually made national headlines, stating, "The construction of a municipal dam should never be left to the sole judgment of one man, no matter how eminent." In March 1929, Mulholland took full responsibility for the worst US civil engineering failure of the 20th century, and he resigned his office. During the coroner's inquest, he had said, "The only people I envy in this whole thing are the dead." On August 14th, 1929, the Department of Public Works, under the administrative oversight of the state engineer, was authorized to review all non-federal dams over 25 feet high, or which would hold more than 50 acre-feet of water. This new legislation allowed the state to employ consultants as necessary, and the state had full authority to supervise the maintenance and operation of non-federal dams. Fred Eaton died on March 11th, 1934. It was ironically one day before the 6th anniversary of the dam failure. In the end, Eaton's desire to enrich himself by selling his property in Long Valley to Los Angeles for an exorbitant price to build a dam and reservoir drove a wedge between him and Mulholland. And the two men never talked again until shortly before Eaton's death. This deadlock ultimately destroyed both men. While holding out to sell Long Valley at his price, which was over $1 million, Eaton's finances crumbled, and in 1928, they collapsed altogether with the failure of the Owens Bank. Well, a dam was eventually built at Long Valley in 1941, creating what you may know today as Crowley Lake in the Owens Valley. Four months after Eaton's death, William Mulholland died in his home on July 22nd, 1935. He was a broken man. That ends my part of the presentation, and now I'd like to hand it over to Diane, who will talk about the victims and survivors of the dam disaster.
Thank you, Alan. On March 12 and 13, it was said that the gates of hell opened up onto a sleeping population. The news of the St. Francis Dam failure spread across the country, all across the United States, and headlines in the morning newspapers told of hundreds dead. Throughout the floodplain, volunteers came to help in many ways. The Red Cross did their best to put on a happy face. They served coffee and cookies to weary volunteers at Happyland Dance Hall. Volunteers rescued those who managed to survive. One man was found in a tree, very high up in the tree. He only lived a few days and then he died. A young girl, a naked girl, was rescued by a gentleman. And for the rest of her life, she couldn't look that man in the face. Volunteers brought ambulances with the dead in them. They also brought coffins. Others wrapped bodies in sheets and brought those to Happyland. Happyland had been a happy place. It had been a place where people went to enjoy themselves, to have a drink, to dance, and to share stories. But now it was a makeshift morgue. The building is still located on Railroad Avenue in Newhall, but no businesses that have tried to have their shops there have survived for very long. Tony Harnischviger, age 42, Leona Johnson, his girlfriend, was 27, and his son Coder, 7, were the first to die. Tony was concerned that the dam was going to break. He'd seen muddy water, multiple breaks, and the night of the 12th, he went down to the dam, with Leona. And we believe that they were there because 20 minutes prior to the dam break, someone passed in a car and saw torches or lights down at the base of the dam. And as Alan said earlier, they found Leona with 2 chunks of the dam on top of her. The bodies of Coder and Tony were never found. Lillian and Lyman Curtis were married in Bakersfield. They moved down to the Santa Clarita area looking for a job. Lyman landed a job with the Waterworks and Supply. Lyman had thought that the dam was going to break. Lillian did as well. Shortly before midnight, Lyman awoke and he heard a noise, a very loud noise. He opened the door and he saw water coming at him, the wall of water. He also felt a mist in the air. He ran to wake up Lillian. Lillian woke up and she grabbed Danny. Lyman helped her get out of the back window. He said he was going to go get the girls, and he told Lillian, run up to the top hill, run up as fast as you can. And so he helped them out the window. They ran and ran and ran. Meanwhile, he went to go get the girls, but it was too late. The water hit, and Lyman and the two girls were washed away. Here you can see the penstocks, 3 penstocks coming down the hill. This is a recent photo of the 3 penstocks. In the old days, there were only 2. And you can see, if you follow the penstocks down the hill, the rectangular area is the powerhouse. In front of the powerhouse, you'll see the curved road, which is the current San Francisco Road. In front of the road, you'll see a white area, which is part of the riverbed that's cemented in. And just below that, you'll see a hill. It's the highest hill that's right behind the area where Lillian and Lyman lived. That's where we believe that Lillian was and spent the night with her son and their dog. The spotted dog made it up there as well. When Lillian got up there, she dug a hole with her hands and she put Danny in it. And then she put the dog on top of Danny to help keep him warm. If you go farther down, you'll see a grouping of trees. That's where all the little houses are. The bodies, did I miss one? It's not there. You don't, that's what it is. You don't have that. Okay, so this is a photo of, this is a photo of Danny Curtis, little Danny, and his mother in 1978. They met and they were reminiscing about that horrible night in the canyon. And what he said was, "Mommy, Mommy, please don't let the water take us." This is Ray Rising. Ray Rising worked in Powerhouse 1, but he lived in the houses next to Powerhouse 2 with his family. Ray was a utility man. He was originally from Minnesota, and one of his favorite things to do was to swim. He swam in many of the 10,000 lakes in Minnesota, and he developed a very, very strong upper body strength. But on March 12th and 13th, he was awakened with a 10-story high wall of water smashing his house in. He was swept into the flood along with his wife, Julia, 29, and his 3 children, Dolores, Eleanor, and Adeline. By some miracle, Ray was able to rise to the surface of the water, even after he bashed into a tree and was all tangled up in the wires that came from the dam. He was lucky to see a rooftop pass by him, and he jumped on top of the rooftop and rode it down the flood path for a bit. And then when it bumped up against the embankment of the river, he managed to jump off and work his way back to the area where Lillian Curtis, Danny, and the dog were sitting. They spent the rest of the night there together, mourning the loss of their families. The bodies of Ray's wife and his 3 girls were found downstream in Newhall. He was heartbroken. He'd lost everything. Meanwhile, his hometown in Minnesota and the little village next door heard of the tragedy. And a woman named Ruby Loretta, was about to leave for California to accompany her younger brother to the docks in LA Harbor, where he had gotten a job as a longshoreman. Both villages encouraged her to find Ray and take him donations that the people of both villages donated. They filled up her car with everything they could think of. She dropped her brother off in LA and went in search of Ray Rising. She found him, a broken man. Ruby and Ray were later married. He quit work and they traveled the world together. They lived for 6 months on a beach in Mexico, traveled on a supply boat in Vietnam during the war, where they hid in the bilges and finally returned to California, where he went back to work for LADWP. They lived in Sylmar, where Powerhouse 3 was located. And then, surprise, a beautiful little girl was born to the couple. They named her Carol. And unfortunately, Carol didn't have anyone to play with at the Sylmar Powerhouse. All the employees were older and had no children. Ray made the unbelievable sacrifice of returning to the newly built Employee Village Powerhouse 2, where he had lost his first family. There were children there, and finally, Carol had playmates. When Carol was 9, her father told her briefly about the tragedy, and he never spoke of it again. Imagine the ghosts that Ray had to live with while he lived for the second time at Powerhouse 2. Ray lived to the ripe old age of 97. Carol described him as overly protective, nice, dependable, and very loving. Of the 129 people who lived in Powerhouse 2 Village, 126 were killed in the flood. This is Otto Steen. Otto Steen worked at Powerhouse 1, so that was above the dam. He was working on the 12th and 13th of March, and on the 13th in the morning, he organized a search party. They were going down the floodplain, and immediately they found 22 people at Powerhouse 2 housing village. Then he heard someone scream, and they looked around, and there they were, Lillian, Ray, the dog, and little Danny. They were weak, they were cold, they'd spent the night freezing, and they had to be carried nearly a mile down what was left of the road to the first aid station, where they were treated and transferred. Later, he was asked, "How did you find them?" He said, "Well, there was this woman, and she kept screaming and screaming and screaming, and that's how they found him." Lillian was asked what she said. She said, "I couldn't say anything. All I could do was scream." Carl Matthews and his family lived at the Powerhouse 2 Village. Carl worked at Powerhouse 2. It was a Monday night on the 12th, and he worked almost until midnight. When he got off, he retired to the basement of the Powerhouse because on Tuesday, he had a chair to deliver. He was one of the most popular of all the employees because anyone who needed a chair or a bedpost or anything, he could do it. That was his hobby. So he went down below to put the final finish on this chair so he could deliver it the next day. When the water came, it was about 140 feet high, and it crushed the powerhouse just like a little eggshell. The next day, they looked for Carl in the basement and they couldn't find him. It was filled with mud, but Carl wasn't there. So they were hopeful that somehow he had made it out, but it was not to be. Carl was found days later in Santa Paula. It's not moving.
Well, let's see.
Sorry, it's stuck.
Technical glitch, just give us a moment.
No problem here.
All right. Oh, there we
There
go.
we go.
There we go.
We're good.
Yay. Okay. So this is Leonardo Cesena on the left. He was either from Spain or from Italy. None of his relatives can agree as to where he came from. But he worked for Newhall Land and Farm, and he broke horses for them. And he died 6 weeks prior to the dam break. His body is located now in the Ruiz Cemetery, which is a private cemetery in San Francisco. He had 12 children, and there was no income with Leonardo gone. So one of his sons, Philip Cesena, on the right, who was 15, decided that even though he wasn't the eldest, he would go into the canyon and he would look for work. He wanted to become a horse trainer, and he wanted to break horses just like his father did. So he got 2 jobs at 2 different ranches, mucking out stalls to begin with. He was also fascinated with the indigenous people there who taught tricks to the B-roll actors in the old silent movies. And they taught them things like running up against the back of the horse, jumping over the rear of the horse into a saddle, and galloping off on the horse and then falling off without getting hurt, or doing somersaults or handstands on the horse. Those were the type of things that he wanted to learn how to do. And he decided that this would be a pretty cool way to earn a second paycheck. So that was what would happen. That's what he thought was going to happen. But sadly, 2 weeks later, the flood occurred and he was swept away, and he was found in Santa Paula. This is the Ruiz Cemetery, and this was taken shortly after the flood occurred. In this instance, a lot of funerals are taking place and people are being buried here. This is a private cemetery, as I mentioned before, in San Francisco Canyon, so it's not accessible to the public. But in this photo are relatives, well-wishers, mourners, and volunteers. The man kneeling here in the Ruiz Cemetery is the famous silent film star, William S. Hart. He's surrounded by the Newhall Cowboys, many of whom were in the early silent films with him. Hart had visited the morgue at Happyland and had seen a little 3-year-old boy who was unclaimed. No one knew who he was. The little boy was found in Castaic, and since no one had claimed him, Hart had this little small monument that you see in front of him made for the little boy as a headstone, and had planned to bury him in the Ruiz Cemetery. Hart also paid not only for the monument, but for a little cowboy outfit, a cowboy hat, a little play pistol, and the coffin. Hart called him our little soldier. This is an aerial view of Castaic Junction. Castaic Junction was completely wiped out. There was nothing left. This is where the little boy was found. What?
You're
The little boy was 3-year-old Johnny Traxler. He and his mother, Emma's in the coffin to the left of Johnny's coffin, had left Merced on the 12th under questionable circumstances. They were headed to visit relatives in Chatsworth. When Emma reached Castaic, she was exhausted. She couldn't go any further. So she stopped there for gas, and she decided they had some cabins there that she would rent a cabin for the night and then continue the next day onto Chatsworth. Johnny and his mother were caught completely unaware by the flood. Johnny, as I said, was found in Castaic amid the rubble of one of the cabins. His mother was later found in Santa Paula. Johnny's dad would not come down to identify the bodies. It took a couple of days for him to realize that they were even missing. But he refused to come down. And so Emma's brother came down, George Smith, from Oakland, and he identified the bodies. He found Emma first in Santa Paula, and he continued to look at the other makeshift morgues, and he finally found Johnny in Newhall. So Emma and Johnny were finally reunited at the funeral home. Sheriff Traeger of Los Angeles and Deputy Sheriff Bogardus of Newhall helped with the expense of the funerals. Our sheriff here, Bogardus, purchased the coffin for Emma. The owner of Oakwood Cemetery provided the 2 plots for Emma and Johnny. Those plots were his personal plots for he and his wife. Emma's husband, Frederick, chose not to spend his claim money for headstones, so the graves of the little soldier and his mother remain unmarked. And this is one of the things that we aim to do, to eventually have all of the unmarked graves marked. We feel that they deserve headstones. This is San Francisco School. During the week, the kids and the trustees, the teachers would all stay at the school. They had no buses, they had, no transportation. People were working out in the fields and didn't have time to drag the kids back and forth to school. So they went Monday morning and they stayed through Friday and then came home for the weekend. Everyone in this photo died. They were in the immediate floodplain. This school district and the B school district did not survive. The Saugus School District lost 8 students, but it managed to survive and is still a school district today. Here's the list of people that died from the San Francisco School and the B School and the Saugus School children. One little thing I want to also say about the San Francisco School is Cecilia Small was just such a fantastic teacher. She loved all of her students and her students loved her. She knew all of their birthdays and provided entertainment and cakes and everything for everyone's birthdays. And all of the bodies were found except Cecilia Small and one of her students. And so a friend of mine who told me the story about what happened at the school told me that this little girl was missing. And she said that the little girl, still missing as of today, was up in heaven holding hands with Cecilia Small and skipping through heaven, which I thought was really cute. Again, here's a photo of Kemp Camp. Kemp Camp, of course, was one of the highest areas of deaths, the highest in Ventura County. And I have a letter that I got from the daughter of one of the men that was at Kemp Camp. And I would like to read that letter to you. It says, in 1920, my father, Everett Gould, left the mining town of Victor, Colorado, seeking employment in Southern California. He found a job with Southern California Edison Company working on Big Creek San Joaquin River project. On March 12, 1928, he and other employees of the Edison Company were camped at Blue Cut Sorry, a cat keeps coming over and bugging me. She wants to be petted. And without warning, the St. Francis Dam burst, releasing a 180-foot wall of water, destroying everything in its path. According to my father, he and his fellow workers were asleep in their 4-man tent. The corner of the tent in which he was sleeping flipped upward. He flipped out and he was able to swim safely. The other 3 in the tent were wrapped up in the tent and perished in the flood. One can only imagine the terror. His life was spared, but all of his belongings were lost in the flood. On July 18th, 1928, he received a statement of settlement from the city of Los Angeles with a check for $263.35 in full payment for loss and damage to personal property arising out of the St. Francis Dam disaster, March 13th, 1928, as per claim on file. Shortly after he returned to Victor, Colorado, where he met my mother and married her in August 1929, he returned to California and found employment with the Department of Water and Power from 1931 through 1945. In 1932 to 34, he worked on the Bouquet Canyon Reservoir under William Mulholland. By 1935 through 1940, he was working on the Boulder Dam project as a tower line mechanic. This is Joe Gottardi. Joe Gottardi was a farmer. He was a supervisor for Newhall Land and Farm for the orange groves, and he rented additional land to raise lima beans. Just west of Kemp Camp is where he lived. He was an Italian immigrant born May 30th, 1886. He and his wife Frances and their 6 children lived and worked on the farm. During the night of March 13th, the chaos at Kemp Camp woke Joe. He said that it sounded like a freight train. He assembled his family since there was no time for escape. They formed a circle. They held hands and they knelt down to pray. The floodwater inundated their house and ripped it off the foundation. Frances and 5 children were ripped away. This is a photo of Frances and Joe on their wedding day. Joe's daughter, Alvina, here on the left, his 3 boys on the right. Unfortunately, we don't have pictures of the other 2 girls. These are the only pictures that survived through an aunt and uncle. But Alvina on the left had been having a recurring dream for 2 weeks before the flood. The family was very religious. And in her dream, a nun came to her, telling her, grab onto a log. She repeated it over and over again, grab onto a log. Alvina was scared. She didn't know what it meant, but she heard it again and again and again in her dream. Alvina didn't know how to swim, and she found herself inundated with water, dirty water. She inhaled it, she coughed it up. She actually made it to the surface somehow, and she was spitting out dirty water. But in front of her was a log. She grabbed onto that log, and that log saved her life. She saw her father struggling to stay afloat, and she moved the log over towards her father. Her father, instead of grabbing onto the log, put his arms up in the air, but the log caught his nightshirt, and Alvina and Joe Sr. floated all the way down to Santa Paula, and they ran aground in an orange orchard, and they managed to escape on the south side of the river. Newhall Land and Farm employees found Joe Sr. 6 days later, still looking for the bodies of his family. Eventually, most of his family were found. In fact, everyone except Leonore the little 4-year-old toddler. She was never found. Here's some burial areas across the US, which I thought you might be interested in seeing how far spread the victims were. And that's all I have. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I hope you come and visit us up the dam. Maybe you can arrange to come up when COVID is over and take a tour with us. And right now we are working on the visitor center. We're trying to figure out what we're going to put on the property. And unfortunately, we have to work with the Forest Service, so things are moving slowly. But as soon as we figure that out, we'll be doing fundraisers for the visitor center. And we'd love to have all of you come up and help us in stewardship and maybe raise some money for the visitor center. And if you guys have any questions, let us know.
That was an outstanding presentation. That was very interesting. Do you have, and maybe you mentioned it, do you have a timeline in mind as far as visitor facilities and things of that sort?
Yeah, about 6 years ago.
We have a timeline, and the Forest Service has a timeline.
Yeah.
Our timeline runs much quicker than theirs. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and things are being stalled right now due to all the fires in California because many of the rangers are out on fires. So
Certainly.
the lead ranger that's working with us is out on a fire right now. So it'll take a little bit longer. But we do have narrowed down. We ran a contest and got 20 submissions. And there's one that Alan and I just love, and we're hoping that that will be the winner of the competition and what we raise money for. It was actually designed by a employee of Disney, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And the centerpiece of it is a recreation of the tombstone, which is that hunk of dam that remained.
One of the obstacles that we ran into in this whole campaign, if you look at national memorials, the vast majority of them are run by the National Park Service.
They all are.
Yeah, there's a few
No,
private
there's a few private ones, yeah.
But yeah, most, in other words, yeah. So in order for us to get the bill passed, one of the things that Congress would not do is they would not, since the Forest Service already owned the land at the dam site, they would not transfer the administration of the dam site from the Forest Service to the Park Service. So we had to accept the Forest Service as the administrator. Now, this is the first time in American history that the Forest Service has run a national memorial. They don't know how to run a national memorial. They don't really want to run a national memorial. And they have no funding for it. And Congress gave us no funding in the bill. So that's the struggle that we've had over the last few years. And that's why we started this foundation, because we knew that in order to make this happen, we were going to have to raise the money to make the national memorial, because the Forest Service wasn't going to do it. And that's where we're at right now.
And we can't raise money until we have a plan to show. So that's where we are. But hopefully we're getting closer and closer to having our plan.
I did have a question. Where do you envision the visitor center to be? I can think of 3 or 4 places just right off the top where one could be, but where do you envision?
Do you know where the fire station is immediately below Powerhouse 2?
Yes.
Okay, that fire station will be moving up to Powerhouse 1 in a year and a half. And we want that chunk of property right there, because immediately in back of it is the powerhouse, and this is their history. So, we want to include them in that, and it's perfect. We can secure that piece of property. And originally we wanted it where the dam is, but the Forest Service won't fence it off. They won't allow us to fence it off. and it's subject to graffiti and, vandalism. And so if we put a visitor center there, every day we'd spend our days removing graffiti. So we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, when we first visioned this project, we were very actually adamant to put the visitor center right on the dam site. If you're familiar with the dam site, there's a group of, if you walk past the dam foundation, you come to a group of oak trees that survived the flood. And to the left of that, there was an open area that we thought would be a great place for a visitor center. But as we thought about this, the logistics of doing that would be really difficult because there's no infrastructure there. We would have to run water there, electricity, and as she said, we'd have to deal with I mean, you basically, San Francisco Canyon is a remote area. It's basically a Wild West where there's really no law enforcement, and so the graffiti problem is terrible there. It just wouldn't be practical. So the site that we're hoping, which is the fire station site next to the powerhouse, seems really the ideal for us.
One thing I also thought I might add, since you mentioned that the fire station there, number of years ago, it's one of my first visits to the St. Francis Dam site. It was with my dad, and we happened to stop by that fire station. We were curious, do you have any information about the St. Francis Dam disaster here, which is just up the hill here? This is before
They did
the
they?
monument was placed. This is before a lot of information was, like, at least on the roadway. They gave us a like, I don't know, 10-page like write-up on the disaster, on the dam. And it was just like, here, we're gonna give you this. Don't tell anybody where you got this from. It felt like it was all on the QT. It was still like a hush hush thing. At least that's the impression that we got.
Wow, I'm surprised you got anything from them.
But we got something.
Well,
I still have it.
This is really an interesting part of the whole St. Francis story, in that this was at the time it happened, this was a huge national story. I mean, there were banner headlines all over the country. I have a collection of newspapers that is posted on the SCV history website that shows that this was not a little thing. It was one of the greatest disasters in American history, and yet it was forgotten. And we believe it was forgotten because of the politics in Los Angeles at the time, where you had this up and coming city in the 1920s and their hero, William Mulholland. And this event, this disaster, was a huge black mark on Los Angeles and a black mark on Mulholland. And it also endangered legislation that they were trying to pass in Congress to create the Boulder or Hoover Dam, which was the Swing-Johnson bill. So Los Angeles, we believe, was very intent on getting this out of the public memory as quickly as possible, and they were very successful at it. They gave reparations to the victims very quickly without too much litigation.
There was only one lawsuit.
Yeah, they found a good excuse to dynamite the one remaining section of the dam, the tombstone, and they did dynamited and fully intact wing dike, which extended out from the dam site. And the remains of the wing dike you can walk on today, but they're blown up. And that was to make the public forget, and the public did forget. And until Charles Outland came out with his book in 1963, nobody addressed this and nobody memorialized it. There was nothing out there. There you go. Yeah. And the culture at the DWP was, and until recently remained, that they didn't want to talk about it either. It was not part of their culture to remember the dam disaster because they felt bad about, what happened there.
The first presentation that we gave was to the retirees of DWP, and we kept calling it a disaster. And at the end, we asked them if they would support our cause. And they all had their arms like this. And they said, well, if you don't call it a disaster, we'll support you. And I said, well, if we can't call it a disaster, what should we call it? And they said, well, an event or an incident, or if you have to, you could call it a flood.
I work for the division of the state architect. And, you know, I keep a piece of, well, it's smaller than this, but you might recognize this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have one of those too,
Yeah,
but don't tell anybody.
yeah.
The nickname is, of course, it's my damn rock, you know.
Yeah,
The thing is that it was because of the St. Francis Dam disaster that geologists, engineers, everybody had to be certified by the state. It shifted the engineers no longer had the final say in the siting of dams. William Mulholland was a great engineer. It cannot be understated. I mean, the Los Angeles Aqueduct, it's an engineering marvel.
It's phenomenal.
mhm.
But don't let him build a dam. It's a short version of it.
He actually worked on 2 dams after that.
That's the thing.
But by that time, he knew what had gone wrong.
Well, that's the thing is that the understanding of geology is a fairly young science. So the understanding of, you know, the landslide, the ancient landslides in the Kelowna schist, or the fault line on the other side of the, you know,
Mhm.
and the Francisquito Formation, and, you know, there's issues. But, you know, it was, but now geologists have the final say. You know, I now work for the state division of the state architect, so I deal with geologists, I deal with architects, I deal with engineers, and they're all certified because of this event.
Mhm.
So, you know, I have shared this with those people, and they're like, you know, I just want to show you, here's this rock. This rock makes your career. What is this rock? And, you know, they want to know more about it. So that's the thing, is that the St. Francis it's so much, you know, with its connection with Highway 99, it's, you know, it destroyed the Santa Clara River Bridge, the 1916 structure. It
Yep.
And
hastened-
I'm sure you know that the abutments are still there.
Yeah,
they are, and both
Yeah.
bridges are still there.
Yeah.
But was more than that, is that San Francisco Creek got rerouted. It hastened something that was going to happen anyway. But San Francisco Creek originally made a large turn going west through what is now the Valencia Industrial Center. The original crossing that US 99 made north of the Santa Clara was a 100-foot crossing. The bridge was not unlike the original structure that was at, well, Castaic Creek, but also the South Fork Santa Clara right next to Saugus Cafe. Not sure if you remember that structure, but it was, I believe, painted the tan, or not, almost an orangish tan, but it was a through girder steel structure. Built 1916, replaced 1995. Similar structure existed across what they called San Francisco Creek. Now it's a small culvert, you know, like 10 feet wide tops. So it rerouted the creek, but that bridge also got eliminated by the St. Francis disaster. It's just interesting to see, you know, so many changes because of that. It's
Pro-
go ahead.
Probably the greatest positive legacy that came out of this disaster were the laws passed afterwards that increased dam safety, and probably has saved, you know, thousands of lives since then,
Yes.
in the way dams are constructed. That was a huge thing, because before that, they were trusting just this one guy to build the dam, and he didn't quite know what he was doing. interestingly enough, there has been a debate over time among dam historians as to whether William Mulholland should have known better in how he built the dam. And the original consensus was that he couldn't have known better because of the technology available at the time as to how to deal with, the ancient Paleolithic landslide and all. But turns out, and particularly with the work of Donald Jackson, who did the recent book Heavy Ground, I believe it's called. If you look back, there were other dam builders before Mulholland that already understood the concepts of hydraulic uplift and were building dams correctly. And he probably should have known better and probably should have read their books before building his dam. So there is some culpability probably with Mulholland's knowledge of dam building, and had there been oversight, perhaps this wouldn't have happened.
And that's the thing, there is now oversight for all dam construction. The concept of gravity arch dams, which the St. Francis was still somewhat of a like cutting edge technology, but raising the dam height without increasing the base does not sound like a good idea. Building it with, this is not good concrete. This is
Right.
Aggregate size is all out of whack. I get local use, but come on, you can do better.
The other major mistake, which ironically resulted in that one tombstone segment left, was most other dam builders at the time and since then would build the drainage wells at the foundation of the dam all the way to the sides of the dam. Well, Mulholland didn't do that. He just put the drainage wells in that center section. That was the only section that survived and stood up. Everything else fell apart.
Yeah. So, the thing is that overall, there's a lot of history there. It's honestly amazing. And, personally, this is stuff I grew up with. I grew up in the Santa Clarita area. I was born in the Newhall Hospital there. Well, Henry Mayo Newhall, Memorial Hospital, where they probably added Mayo just to make it sound better for, Mayo Clinic, but, lived in Kenny Country, So this was a part of the history, like the US 99 was a part of the history. The Ridge Route was a part of the history. You also mentioned the Burrell pipeline, or the Burrell power line. Burrell, as in it came from Kern River. And that power line, many parts still exist today, which was constructed in 1907, was the longest power line at the time. And another connection with US Highway 99 is the Big Creek line. Also was damaged by the St. Francis. It was one of the indicators of something is definitely wrong here. It follows the Ridge Route, US Highway 99. And it was also because of the disaster, they realized maybe we need to route this 2 places, not 1. And as a result, there are now 2 routings of the Big Creek lines and other major power lines as well. It's so much. And one thing I really want to thank both of you for honestly an amazing presentation. I've learned a heck of a lot. I thought I knew so much about the disaster, and there's always more to know. It's an amazing bit of history. It's one of those things that, dare I say, makes Santa Clarita unusually special.
Well, this is one of the reasons we think it's so important to have that national memorial there. Some would argue that, oh, this was just a local event here that only we would care about. But as we've pointed out, this really had major national significance, and it deserves national recognition, not just as a state historic site or a local tourist, a local attraction, but really it really was part of American history as much as it was part of our local history. And not only was it a major disaster, but it's a tremendous story. I mean, you know, the stuff that we've told you today, it's a great story. I mean, it would make a great movie, which we're hoping someday maybe it will do. But yeah, it's really a treasure that Santa Clarita has that nobody has really addressed in 90 years, and that's kind of what we're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, you know, I've kind of looked at the history of the St. Francis Dam and the whole, you know, kind of in the last 15 years, and you know, I've seen a lot of the photographs of, you know, the immediate aftermath. Just look at the first of all, the power of what happened, and that was impressive enough. But what I enjoyed about your presentation is you delved very deeply into, yes, there was a lot of power and a lot of things went wrong, but here's the human side of this story. And this is what happened to those people that night. And this is how it affected those people and others, the ones that survived, for decades beyond, for the rest of their lives. It was very interesting.
Mhm.
And it's still affecting the progeny of these people today.
Tell them about the bathtub with that lady.
Okay, I was telling you guys about the Guattardi family and Alvina, the girl that survived with the log. She ended up getting married and she had children of her own. And one of the kids that she had was named Francis. I met Francis, and Francis was telling me that Alvina, her mother, used to take the kids, put them all in a bathtub with about 2 inches of water. And she would scrub them down. She would shampoo their hair. And then she would take a measuring cup, pour it over their head, and rinse them with the measuring cup. She would never take the children anywhere where there was water. No ponds, no lakes, no rivers, no ocean, ever. And it wasn't until Frances got married and she moved to close to the ocean in Ventura County that she actually saw the ocean for the first time. And she took swimming lessons and her kids took swimming lessons, and, you know, so they're back to enjoying water, but Alvina never.
I think today we would call that PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
But there's so many stories like that. I've met so many people and talked to so many. I met a girl in New Jersey a few weeks ago, and she was related to the Curtis family. And I have volumes of information that I haven't dissolved yet, you know, haven't really looked at all of it. But I mean, there's so much more to learn. And it's just so interesting how everyone was affected.
Yeah. Another interesting common thread that we found is that the survivors did not want to talk about their experience. You know, they even to their own families, they didn't want. It was too painful for them to even vocalize what had happened to them.
And yet, all of them were asked, so who do you blame for this? Do you blame Mulholland? And they all said no. It was just something that happened.
Except the one lady right after the disaster who had "Kill Mulholland" sign on her lawn. But
That
was one.
Yeah.
yeah,
One more thing I
Yeah.
want to add is, you know, before, you know, I guess closing, is our secretary, Vicky Parmald, who was not able to be at the meeting. Her either grandmother or mother, one of her relatives, let's just put it that way, was involved with the disaster, lived in the Santa Clarita area, remembered
Wow.
the, you know, the flood and everything else. I don't know all the specifics, but it was a part of their life. So even the 99 Association has some sort of a connection.
Wow. Well, if she wants to get her family story out there, have her contact me and give me the information. I'm writing up information about each family to present in the visitor center. And if she has photos, we'll have a photo and then the family story.
Oh, will do. We'll make sure of
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
that would be great.
We're also hoping that as part of the memorial that we will have a memorial wall with the names of all the victims on the wall.
That would definitely be something that is warranted there. One other thing before, closing is there anything, that the 99 Association can do to help? We have a
Get
link.
the word out there. Get the word out there. If anyone's interested in coming up and taking a tour with us or donating for the visitor center, or the dam site is a big dump site. People go up there and dump stuff all the time. So we're always up there doing cleanups. If anyone wants to do a cleanup with us, I mean, there's so many things.
The other thing I would say is, once we have the plan nailed down from the Forest Service as to what they want to do, she and I are going to go going to corporations to see if we can raise money from corporations. So if you have any corporate connections or know any directions to point us, that would be helpful too.
Michael, would it be helpful to have their contact information on the website?
We actually do have that information on our website, and the St. Francis Dam site is actually on our list of Highway 99 adventures,
Excellent, excellent.
along with a link to their organization.
Okay,
Great.
I must have missed it. Maybe I didn't look deep enough, but yeah. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that.
So we're on top of that.
Fantastic, thank you.
So is there anything else to add? Otherwise, I think we're pretty well at the end here. So once again, I do want to thank both of you for, a wonderful presentation. Like I said, a lot has been covered, and it's honestly been big learning experience. Either way.
We're always happy to do it because this has kind of become our life. I mean, this is a legacy that she and I want to leave to the community, to have the proper memorialization and remembrance of the St. Francis Dam disaster that's been missing for 9 decades. And we're very dedicated to doing this. So hopefully it'll come to pass. I mean, we've already accomplished a national memorial. That was damn hard to do. To get through this Congress, anything?
Ugh,
Come on.
yeah.
So
That's
we've
important.
accomplished. Yeah.
One of the interesting things about that, however, is it passed in February. And then the president didn't sign it. And I was like, oh my God, is he not going to sign it? And he signed it on the anniversary,
It was March 12th.
March 12th. Yeah. Yeah.
Could have been
And I-
coincidental, could have been, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, whether he did that intentionally or not, I don't know,
Well,
but
yeah,
I was really
Yeah,
pleased.
it probably was just going. I mean, it was part of a big omnibus bill of how many 100 different bills.
Yeah. Different.
I
things,
doubt he
different
even
lands.
knows that he signed our bill.
But he did.
Yeah, but he did.
But the important thing is, regardless, it has been signed. It is a national, okay, so it is a
Memorial.
national memorial and a national monument.
Both.
Yes.
Both.
Yes, we have a lot of endangered species on the site. And so that's what I wanted the monument for, to protect those species. And so we have to do a lot of things to protect those species and make sure that, nothing happens to them. So that's why the monument.
Yeah, I'm involved also with, in addition to the 99 Association, also with the Ridge Art Preservation Organization.
I was just going to say, because I know you have that connection. You guys should probably try to get that to be a National Historic Highway to connect with our thing.
It is on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yeah.
So
I think
it
there's
has that.
Yeah.
But there is a National Historic Highway legislation that you can get it, a designation.
I think there's something above what there
Yeah.
is right now on there.
Yeah, I will I definitely will look into that because,
Talk to your congressman.
yes,
Because if we were able to achieve that with you guys, then we have a connected thing between the St. Francis Dam and the
Mhm.
Ridge Route, which would all become a national historic site of some.
yeah, no, that definitely, and of course, it all ties into US Highway 99, you know, that lovely
Yeah.
road right there
Yeah.
with the sign. Yeah, this is how things get done. So, again, want to thank everybody for coming to the meeting. And I think that pretty well covers it.
All right.
Thank you
Well,
very, very much.
Thank you all.
yes,
and-
thank you.
For
Thank you
your
very
effort,
much.
time. This has been great, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, we'll definitely make some arrangements to get something up there, a tour or what have you up there at the site. I've gone there
Fantastic.
just before midnight on March 12th on some year back in the 90s and was there at the dam site, and I just had to do it, It was eerie.
Yeah.
to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
Very quiet, very still, interesting.
Yep.
So again, thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Our pleasure.
And
See you soon up here, I hope.
yes, yes. And also just quite with one last little plug here, October 23rd. Yeah, just a few weeks away. The Ridge Route Preservation Organization will be holding an event on the Ridge Route to help remove debris and clear the road.
Fantastic.
Whoever can come, join us.
Where are you meeting and what time?
We are meeting in Gorman at 8 a.m. There's
Okay.
additional information on ridgeroute.org.
Okay.
Oh, and Michael, when I also run the SCV Historical Society. So when we start doing lectures again, God knows whenever this
Yeah.
pandemic is over with, I'm going to hit you up for a lecture too on 99.
I can do that. I've done it in the past. I will do it again.
Yeah. Good.
I did one once with that was headed by what the heck's his name? Tom Frew.
Oh,
Tom Frew,
yes.
yeah.
I still have the slides,
Yeah.
like actual
Tom
slides.
Tom Frew is now living in Camarillo, I believe
Yeah.
it is. And we actually went to his house and he gave us some of his old artifacts from his blacksmith shop that we
That's
now
great.
have at the Historical Society.
So yeah, so we will be in touch, and thank you again. And I'm
All right.
going to sign off.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.